Good morning, and welcome to another edition of Tech Tuesday presented by Delta Media Group, where the first rule of enjoying a time travel movie is to not think about time travel. Now, speaking of time travel, we are going to go in and take a look at seller reports, something we've gone over in the past, but we have added some new functionality, so we want to give it another look so that you can see all the new things we've done. Now, first off, what a seller report is basically a listing traffic report. So you'll set these up for any of your sellers whenever you have a new listing. So you'll get a listing, an active listing in the system, and you'll set the system up to send a report with listing traffic statistics and the kind of marketing activity you've done on their listing to go out automatically to the seller. And generally they'll go out once a week. That is the default setting for those. But there are a lot of things that you can control related to those and how they're sent out. So that is what we will go over. Now, first off, we will take a look at just the general settings around seller reports. So to get there, I could just type email up here in the quick actions, and I would find my way there that way. Or I can click over here on the settings gear, and I can find my email settings in here. So if I just type email, you can see we have email message settings. Or if I were to type email up here, email message settings would be one of my results. So however I get there, this is the page that it will take me to. And then if I scroll down almost all the way to the bottom, you can see, actually I did scroll all the way to the bottom. You can see the second to last thing on the page here is seller report options. So we'll expand that, and you can see it gives some general information that you can read over about seller reports, and there's a description on each one of these settings and what it does. But we'll go ahead and go over them because why not, right? Now the first thing we have here is I guess to describe it, there are multiple sections that make up one of these seller reports, and this is how you would turn on and off each one of those sections. By just uncheck the box, that turns that section off. So the first one we have here is the competing listings section, and that just shows other listings on the market that the system believes are similar to your listing, and you have a little bit of control over what the system will consider similar to your listing, or your seller's listing rather. The next thing we have here is the pending listings section. So same exact thing, but showing listings that are pending instead of those that are active. If we have sold data turned on for your company, and that's turned on at the company level, and we do have that data, or we are getting that data from the MLS, then you will have the option here to include or not include the sold listing section. Next is the open houses section, so it's the same, looking at the same listings, but just those with upcoming open houses. Next, you can choose whether or not you want it to show web crawler views in addition to the regular traffic it shows. So, it's going to show actual customer traffic to the listing detail page for that particular listing. This will show the number of times a search engine actually crawled that page also. And then the next piece here, you can include the lifetime stats for the listing. So the difference is there, by default, it will show, traffic stats over the last several months. What this will do is allow you to show all the traffic stats the entire time that listing has been on the market. And that can be particularly nice for higher dollar listings that stay on the market for a while. That way you can keep track of all those stats. Or rather, your seller can keep track of all those stats as well. And the next piece we have here allows you to choose the template that email will use. These first two we keep in the system here, and some do choose to use those, but these are a couple of the older templates. So those are available to you. But then by default, we use this template number 3, which is our newest template and kind of most up-to-date design. Typically, as we add new designs in here or add new designs to the platform, we'll set the newest design as the default. That way it keeps things up to date for you. Now the next thing we have here is a seller report add section. So what that is just a section that appears up at the top of your seller reports. So this lets you select a title for that section, and then also lets you select content for that section. So we call it an ad section because it makes sense to put an ad or that kind of content there, but really it's just a message that's going to show up at the top of all of your seller reports. The other neat thing here is you have a full WYSIWYG editor here, so if you wanted to add pictures and links, things like that, you can also do that. Now, once you have this set up the way you want, you just click Update Traffic Report Template, and that will update the template, and then all of your seller reports that the system sends out on your behalf will use these settings. Alright, so now to actually get into creating a seller report, we're going to go up here and go to Listings, and then down to Manage My Listings. Now you could also get there by, again, just typing up here in the Quick Actions Listings, and you could find the Manage My Listings page. If you wanted to get into a specific listing, you could actually put that listing address or MLS ID up here, and then you can go straight into that listing settings. And we'll look at that a little bit as to how you would set up a seller report that way as well. But to start off, the way you would most conventionally set up a seller report is you would go to this page and go down here, choose the listing that you want to set up a seller report for, and then we'll click on Tools, and then you see we have a seller report section, and in this case, this listing does not have an existing seller report, so it says None Set. So we'll just click on None Set, and that takes me to my seller report page. Now the only difference here between going to this page for one that does not have an existing seller report versus one that does is if this listing did already have some seller reports set up, those would be listed out here, and I would have the option to go in and modify or delete any of those. Now, to set this up, we're just going to click on Set Up Report to a Seller, or you could choose to set up one for yourself as well. But we'll go through it this way. It amounts to the same thing, really. So it takes us here into Wizard Step 1. So Step 1, we're going to define who our seller is. So I'm just going to go with the aptly named seller person. There we go. So all I'm doing is first name, last name, and email address here, and now I'm going to click on Next Step. And what the system will do first is try to find if there are any customers in my database that match the email address and name, or are a reasonably close match to the name and email address I put in here. And then it will suggest those to me as a person to add this seller report to. That way I'm not creating duplicate customers if I don't have to. So if the person I'd like to add this report to is in the list, I'll just check the box next to them and click Next, and that'll move me on to the next step. If not, I can say No Sellers Matched, and you can see it opens up a section down here that autofills with what I already put in, and I can click Add Seller, and the system will create a new account for that person. So just a nice easy way that if you have them in there already, you can attach them. If you don't have them in there already, you can add them really quickly. So we'll go ahead and add them to this one. Why not? And click on Next, and now this will take me into my actual seller report settings. Go ahead and refresh my page. It seemed to get a little finicky on me there. There we go. Occasionally I have a little connection issue, but I think we're good. So now that we've selected our customer, and it's taken me to my last step of seller report setup, you can see first we choose who this is going to send to. So it's either going to send to the seller and then copy me on that, or you can have it send to just the seller, or you can have it send to just the agent, which would be you. What we generally suggest is that you set this up just to go to the seller, because you can set up as many of these seller reports as you want. So that way you can have one that goes to you and one that goes to the seller as completely separate reports that can send on the same day or different days. It's not a bad idea to have the report go out to you maybe the day before it would go out to the customer each week. That way you can get a look at it, see what it's going to send, and if you want to change anything about it, you have a day to do that. So for now, we'll set this one up to go to just the seller. I can choose to copy additional recipients on this if I'd like, so I just have this box checked, and I would just put in the email addresses in here that I want to copy on this report. Or I can uncheck that if I don't need it to go to anyone else. It can be a nice convenient way if you want to send exactly the same report to multiple people. But again, we typically suggest you create a seller report for each recipient. That way, if the customer chooses to opt out of that seller report, they're not opting out all the recipients of this report. They have their own report, and they're just opting out themselves. Because basically opting out turns the report off. Plus, you have metrics that pertain to each of these reports that go out. So it's nice to have one for each person, so you can see the specifics of not just the report that went out, but which person is actually viewing the report, and all that. You have direct metrics attached to those. So the next piece we have here is you can add some additional notes. The nice thing about adding notes here is that they'll show up to only this recipient. So if you were to add a note to the listing, which you can, then that note is going to show up on all the seller reports that go out for that listing, regardless of who they're going to. So if you have 5 seller reports going to 5 different people for that listing, they're all going to get the notes that are on the listing. But if you add a note here, only the recipients of this specific seller report are going to get these notes. And if you want to add more than one, you can just use that Add Note button, and it'll give you more fields here. Now the next thing you can do is you can select a data template, and we'll work our way back to this. So we'll skip over that for now, but we'll come back to it. So the next thing you'll do is you'll choose what day of the week you want it to send on. So it's going to choose the current day by default, but you can set this to whatever you'd like. And the next thing you do is choose the frequency. So weekly, again, is going to be the default there, but you can do bi-weekly or monthly if you'd like. And then you choose the initial send day. So by default, that's going to be the next available day to send out based on what day of the week you're sending on. At that point, you can click Finish, and you can just be done with it. However, if you would like to fine-tune the comps that are included on this listing and some of the elements of this report, that is what this section allows you to do. So you have minimum and maximum price, that's going to be plus or minus 30% by default, but you can change that. Square feet plus or minus 15% by default. So you see you can change the specifics of all of this listing criteria. Now maybe the most important part here is that you can limit this by property category also. So if this particular listing is a townhouse or condo, for example, you could undo single family and just do townhouse and condos, because those are going to be the things that actually are comparable to this listing. I mean, you wouldn't want to send a seller report out for a condo and include single family listings in a lot of cases because they're just not really going to be comps. So this allows you to fine tune that a bit. And then you also have choices here for land, multifamily, or commercial. And you can see your property types update accordingly based on which one of those categories you have selected. Now the next thing you can do is you can further limit this by area. So by default, you can see the default lookup for comparable listings is by state, city, and zip code. But if you want to define the area a little bit differently, depending on how your market is set up, so this listing could be in a market where there are wide variances in the type of property that might be in one part of the market versus the other if you're defining it that way. So you can choose different ways to define this. So I could say, well, every listing in these 5 zip codes is really going to be comparable to this one. So I could say location type zip code, and I could put zip codes in here. And I'm just going to pick a few random ones, and you see how I can add multiple there. Maybe we'll type out that last one. Why not? And now what it's doing is using listing data, and this is all sample data, so this isn't always going to match up for me. But what you do is type out your zip code when you've chosen zip code here, and then select it from the autocompleter, and that adds that into the list. And then next you can choose whether or not you only want to include waterfront listings. So that just lets you define that area so that you're better defining the comps for this listing. Now the next piece you can do here is you can limit the solds that will show. So if there is sold data showing on these reports, what we found is that in a lot of cases, if you show just all the solds in that area that have ever sold in that area, if it's a listing or in a market that's small enough that there aren't a ton of sold listings there, it could show listings that sold, a year and a half ago, and that might not be indicative of the market anymore. So you might not want to include sold listings that sold that long ago. So what you could do here is you could limit this to say, 60. So now only listings that have sold within the past 60 days will be included in this report. Now for larger markets that have had a lot of listings that have sold relatively recently, this doesn't really factor in because the report is only going to show the 50 most recently sold listings there. So if all of those listings sold within the last couple of months, then this kind of becomes a non-issue. But if only maybe 10 listings a month have sold in there for the last 12 months, then you might want to limit this to not show those older ones. Or we'll just leave it on default and stick with that. And then when you're all done, if you've customized this, you just click on Finish, and that'll have your report set up. Now, scrolling back up here to the data template, what the data template is it allows you to define all of these things automatically. So if you don't want to go with the defaults, but you have set up kind of overrides that you want to go with often, then you can go here to Data Template and select your data template, and you can see it clears out the rest of those fields because that's defined by your template. Now I can click on Manage Templates, and you can see it opens up a new tab for me. And then here we have, that's my first template, so I can delete that or I can edit that template if I want. And if I edit it, or if I were to create a new one, you can see that I have all of those same fields we just went over. So it allows me to define all those once and then just use it over and over again. All right, so we'll go ahead and close that window out. There we go. And now also, we'll click on Manage Templates one more time. If I wanted to add a new one, you can see I would define all those, but I would type out my title up here so that I can keep track of those. And then down here at the bottom, click Finish. And that finishes it out. All right, so we'll close that window out, and we'll go down here and just click on Finish. So there we go, my report's all set. And now you can see on this page, it shows the report that I have here. So from here, I have a shortcut to edit the customer's info, or I can go over here under Actions. I can send out the report right now. I can send a preview of it. I can view the history, which will show me all the stats on that. I can modify it, which would take me back to the page we were just on. So I can modify the settings for this report, or I can click Delete if I just want to get rid of it. So there you have it. Or if I want to set up an additional one, these buttons still exist for me, or I can fire off a preview email right from here. And if I click that preview button, you can see I can put in an email address there so that that report goes to whoever I'd like. Typically, this is a way that I would send a report off to myself just to get a preview of it, but I can choose a different recipient here just to fire off a quick preview. So there we go. So now if we close that out, we'll head back over to the Manage Listings page because there are just a couple more pieces of things you can now do for seller reports. And I'll click on the wrong button first so that we look at the wrong thing. There we go, manage my listings. So the next thing I can do here is we have a Create Seller Reports button. So this would be the next way that I can set up a seller report. The neat thing about this is this allows me to set up a seller report for my own listings, or if I don't have any listings, I can set up a seller report for another company listing. The benefit to this is that if I don't have any listings and I have I'm going to a listing presentation, I have a prospective seller out there, and I want to show them the kind of reports I can send, I can set them up with a seller report for a listing that isn't mine. The nice thing about that is they get an idea what those reports look like, and can get a feel for that so that I can use them there. And these are also nice for training. So, if an admin were to set this up, or, they wanted to take you through how to set up a seller report when you don't have any seller reports of your own at that moment, you can use this to do that. The process is exactly the same. The only difference is I would type out a listing address or an MLS ID, and it would show me the matches, and then I select that to kick off the process. So we'll close that out. Now the next thing that I can do here is I can click on notification settings, and from here I can have the system automatically create seller reports for me. Now the system doesn't know who the seller is, at least right now. It knows who I am though, so what I can do is set this up and just turn this on, and then I'll just set some defaults. So that'll be a send day, a send frequency, how I want the location type to be defined, and how I want the last updated to be handled, and click on save. And then what this is going to do is when a new listing comes up on the market, it will automatically create a seller report for that listing that goes to me alone. Now the cool thing about that is it's kind of a reminder each time I get a new listing that I'm going to get that seller report and remind me that, oh hey, I have a seller for this, I should go in and set the seller report up. And to kind of further that, the report that comes to me alone is going to include a line on it or a section on it that indicates that this seller report was automatically created for me, and I'll have a link in there that I can click on to go into the DeltaNet and set up a seller report to actually go to the customer as well. So that is a pretty cool automation in there that works as a reminder for me. And even if I didn't want to set up a seller report to go off to my customer, the neat thing about this is I'm still getting that listing traffic report automatically, which is still useful information to me, even if I don't necessarily want to send that out to my seller. Though typically you would. So to use it, I just set my settings here, switch it to on, and hit save, and then the system will start building those out for me. And so I'll close that out. Now the last way that I will go over that you can create seller reports is I can go down here and I can go into the listing profile page directly. So I can just click on the listing MLS ID, which you'll have to imagine that that's an MLS ID since these are all test listings. And then over here I can choose sellers, and you see I can add a seller to my listing. So I would just type out their name here, and it's going to search my customer database for that person. And then I would click on their name to add them as a seller to this listing. And then from there, this gives me a quick and easy way that I can message my sellers so it stores them or attaches them to the listing. And in addition to that, it gives me a button here that I can add seller reports or create a seller report for this customer for this listing very quickly and easily from here. So the process beyond that is the same. This is just another way that you can add them in and then add in those seller reports. So there you have it. That is the seller report system as it exists today. We're continually building out the system and improving functionality to try and make it better and easier and really just make your life easier, because that's what we're all about. So, as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to send an email into support@deltagroup.com, and our support team will help you out, or give us a call, and we can walk you through whatever you need. So thanks a lot, and I will see you again next week.